C first. Good morning, church. So our reading this morning is from Colossians chapter 3, verse 18 to chapter 4, verse 1. And this can be found in the Church Bible, page 1184, 1184. Colossians 3:18. Instructions for Christian households. Wives, submit yourselves to your husbands, as is fitting in the Lord. Husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them. Children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord. Fathers, do not embitter your children, or they will become discouraged. Slaves, obey your earthly masters in everything, and do it not only when their eyes is on you and to curry their favor, but with sincerity of heart and reverence for the Lord. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters. Since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward, it is the Lord Christ you're serving. Anyone who does wrong will be repaid for their wrongs, and there is no favoritism. Masters, provide your slaves with what is right and fair, because you know that you also have a master in heaven. This is the word of the Lord. I'm going to say something. As I was reading that passage, I was getting emotional. And the reason for that is I struggle to see when I offered to read, when we started doing the rota, I was setting out a test of faith. And for some reason, Emma dropped me off the rota, and I was fine with that. And a couple of months ago, I said to her, I wouldn't mind reading. I almost didn't read this morning. Ian was going to do the reading. And this morning he said to me, are you okay? I said, I'll give it a try. I've given it a try. My eyes was getting cloudy and cloudy as I read. But I thank God. And I'll just, sorry if you don't mind, I'll just do a testimony. I had an eye appointment on Thursday. Was it Wednesday? And I was my consultant sent me to a specialist because I had an operation in September, and that operation was supposed to be easy and smooth, but then I developed a membrane in my eye and then an inflammation. And one of the things this other specialist said to me, we don't know what to do. So we're going to have to hang heads together. And this is not the first time I'm hearing that from doctors. So I received an appointment, I think it's the 9th of September. I think it's called the uveitis consultant and the ophthalmologist are going to meet with me to decide what to do. So please pray. So I thank God that I was able to read that. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicky, for reading. Thank you for your testimony. Thank you for your prayer request. Bless God. And now, Wendy, please come and bless us with God's word as revealed and shared with you.
So, God, I'm sorry, I'm just a bit breath taken away by Vicky's testimony. So, okay. So, And finally I get to do this passage, and this is not an easy passage, so thank you, Ken. Thank you. It's about talking about the Christian household, and a household around the time this was written was big. Most people lived in households. They had there was family, there were slaves, there were other dependents, there might be apprentices, there might be people working in the family business. It was a big group of people. So it's a large group of people, and the main thing to say about this passage is it's not a set of, if you like, practical instructions. It's a set of spiritual instructions for the household. And I must say, when I looked at it, I thought, oh, Paul, what are you doing? Because this looks as though it's talking very much about the status quo, keeping things normal, and power relationships. Because in the household, in a normal household, a husband could beat his wife. A father could beat his children. A master could beat his slaves. And that was no news at all. That was just normal. And a father could actually kill his child, or a master could kill his slave, and that was not news. And if a husband killed his wife, he could possibly get some comeback from her family because he was disrespecting that family. But it wasn't out of order. He could also just dismiss his wife and send her away. And what it looks like we're just reinforcing the power relationships here. And you think, well, Mary, when she learned she was expecting Jesus and she went to visit Elizabeth, she said, Lord, with my son, you have cast down the proud and raised up the humble. And Jesus, when he was walking on earth, he welcomed lepers. He welcomed people who were afflicted with demons. He welcomed the woman who'd got chronic bleeding. All of these people were unclean, and he welcomed them and he made them clean. He used the Samaritan woman who'd got a really dubious reputation to evangelize a whole village. He welcomed in people. He turned over those power relationships. And Paul's early Christian education was from a woman called Prisca. He talks about his fellow apostle, a woman called Junia. He talks about the church that meets in Chloe's house. He writes letters to women. So what is going on here? How is this telling women to submit to their husbands? How is this consistent with what Paul has been talking about? So I saw this and I thought, this is a difficult passage. One of the things that you can do when you've got a difficult passage is look at parallel passages. Now, I want to talk about this as calling it belonging, because the wife and the children and the slaves in the normal way of the world, they were belongings. They were property. They were owned. They didn't exist as people in their own right. They were belongings. So can you show the parallel passages? Brilliant. So I found two really relevant parallel passages, which are in Ephesians chapters 5 and 6 and 1 Peter chapters 2 and 3. The Colossians chapter is a little bit more inclusive, and it's also a little bit shorter than the other ones. But basically they are parallel passages. And each of these parallel passages has got a bit of a preamble. So Peter last week talked about the preamble to this passage, about being conformed to Jesus, and about fitting the good properties of a Christian onto us. And the preamble to the passage in Ephesians is very short. Isn't she amazing? Isn't she fantastic? So it says, and this is the whole of the preamble, it says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. And just to make sure this really is relevant, this is the parallel passage, this is not me making it up, the very next verse is, wives, submit to your own husbands as you do to the Lord. This is absolutely in context. And it says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. So, yes, I am called to submit to Roger because he's my husband. I'm also called to submit to Ian. I'm called to submit to Caroline. I'm called to submit to Daphne. I'm called to submit to Lisa. I am called to submit to Helen. I'm called to submit to Grace. I'm called to submit to Ken. Because Ephesians 5:21 is calling me to submit. And Ephesians 5:21 is calling Roger and Ian and Richard and any other husbands also to submit to one another and to submit out of reverence to Christ. So submission to your husband is not a unique thing that women are called to do. Submitting to one another is what we are called to do as a body of Christ. Can I have the next slide? Q. So this is part of the preamble to the Christian household in 1 Peter. So again, this is from a parallel passage. This is not me taking things out of context. And it says, submit to the law as free people. So our submission, we are called to submit out of freedom. We are not called to submit out of fear. We're not called to submit out of coercion. We're not called to submit out of bribery. We are called to submit because we are free. So this is not somebody putting submission on us. This is submission because we are free. We are free people. It is willing. It is done through grace. It is done just laying down our ego, laying down our pride, laying down our self-will out of love. So can I have the next slide? In 1 Peter, Peter says, something about submission is out of freedom, and submission is not being a doormat. Peter uses the example of Sarah as an example of submission. Talks about the women of the Old Testament who submitted to their husbands, like Sarah, who obeyed Abraham and called him her Lord. Now, nobody's forced Peter to pick Sarah. He's voluntarily picked Sarah. He's deliberately picked Sarah. And Sarah was not a doormat. In fact, can I have the next slide? There is this really, really important passage about Sarah. So the story is that God has promised Abraham and Sarah that they will have descendants and they will be a great nation. And it's not happening. So Abraham has a child with Sarah's servant Hagar. It might have been Sarah's idea. And Hagar, over the next 10 years or so, really makes herself unbearable to Sarah because she's got a son and Sarah hasn't. So in the end, Sarah can't stand it anymore, and she goes to Abraham and she says, send Hagar and the child away. And Abraham doesn't like it, and he goes to God to complain about it. And God says, don't be distressed. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you. So even if it's just one incident in a long life, it is showing you that Sarah was allowed her opinion. Sarah was allowed some power in that relationship. Sarah was not a pushover. She was not a walkover. And at least in this instance, God told Abraham to do what he was told. So this is Peter's example of submission. Submission is not being a walkover. Submission is knowing who you are in God and still putting things, laying down your pride, laying down your ego. Also, in submission, God doesn't call us to do things that are wrong. If you're submitting to somebody and they ask you to do something that's wrong, then the answer is no. That is not the right thing to do, and my conscience won't allow me to do that. It's not my ego won't allow me to do that. It's not my pride. It's my conscience won't allow me to do that. So we're not called in submission to do things that we believe to be wrong. So submission, it's mutual. We submit to one another. Next slide, please, Renee. Thank you. Husbands are called to love their wives. And this one should be a lot more familiar than that Ephesians submit to one another. We are all called to love one another. Now, this love, there's a great book by C.S. Lewis called The Four Loves, which I can heartily recommend. And Greek language is really specific about love. This love that husbands are called to have for wives, that we are called to have for one another, it's not romantic love. It is not chocolates and roses and walks in the moonlight, although these are very nice things, and I do not discourage them. But it's something different. It's a love called agape. It is the love that God has for the church, and Jesus has for the church, and this is the love that we are called to have for one another. And Paul, very helpfully, next slide please. Paul, brilliant, thank you. Very helpfully gives us a description, a definition of what this love is. So we are called, husbands and wives and all members of the church, to be patient and kind with one another, not to envy, not to boast, not to be proud. We are called not to dishonour others, not to shame one another, not to be self-seeking, to be slow to anger, not to keep a record of wrongs, but to forgive everything, not to delight in evil, but to rejoice in the truth, and to protect, to trust, to hope, and to persevere. So, little hint, husbands who were at that time able to put aside their wives, always trust, always hope, always persevere. So this was gentle, but, strong. So as Christians, therefore, we are called to submit to one another and to love one another, and these are mutual. These are not exclusively confined to one role or another. So can we go back to the reading, please, Renee? Thank you. So now we've got children and parents. Children are called to obey their parents, and parents are called not to embitter or not to exasperate their children. I do not think that parents can use these verses to demand obedience of their children. Firstly, that verse 20, children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord, that is not addressed to parents. If a parent tries to use that verse, they're reading somebody else's letters. That's not addressed to you, that's addressed to children, not parents. Again, it's calling children to obedience out of freedom, out of love, out of grace, but not out of fear, out of coercion, out of bribery, because those are all spiritually unhealthy ways of getting obedience. The only spiritually healthy way of having obedience is a relationship of trust. And this is a passage about spiritual health within the household. So firstly, you're reading somebody else's letters. Secondly, if the child is old enough to receive this, then the child can receive it. If the child's too little and doesn't understand it, if the child is not spiritually mature enough, then you can't use this verse to demand obedience from your child, because it's addressed to the child. A 2-year-old is highly unlikely to understand that. And thirdly, if asking for this obedience from your child embitters and annoys and exasperates your child, you know, teenagers, that's exasperation. If that's, then you're not fulfilling your side. It's not a bargain, it's a mutuality. But if you're using verse 20 to ask for obedience, and you are causing verse 21, then it's not working. Okay? So we can't use this as a stick to beat our children with. So the next piece of the passage, please. Thank you. Slaves are asked to serve with their hearts and not just when somebody's watching. And I think this also refers to us when we're serving, when we're working, when we're employed, that we need to we work with our hearts. We don't just do it because somebody's watching. And again, we are not doing it from fear. We're not doing it from coercion. We're not doing it for hope of currying favour. We're not doing it from bribery. We do it with our hearts because that is the way to be serving in a spiritually healthy way. And it struck me this morning, actually. The verse 4:1 is in another translation. Provide your slaves with everything they need. And it struck me that what servants do is that they are providing their masters with what their masters need, and that what the masters are also asked to provide the servants with what they need. And again, it's balanced. There's a reciprocity, an evenness here. And also, the other thing is that Jesus says, anyone who wants to be great in the kingdom must be the servant of all. And Jesus did a slave's job. He did a servant's job of washing his disciples' feet. He put himself in the position of a servant. And therefore, the slaves are in the position of a servant, and if as somebody providing service, they are doing it in a spiritually healthy way, they are then becoming very great in the kingdom. So slaves and masters are asked to serve one another. Can we go back to my last slide, please, Renee? Thank you. The other thing that